Today's episode is brought to you by Dilly Dally Fest 2, which is a 3-day festival from November 15th to 17th, 2024, located at the Underground Arts, 1200 Callowhill Street, Philadelphia, PA. This is 3 days of some of the best of what Screamo has to offer, including Seisha, Verse Self, Jillian Carter, Mount Ida, The Here's Collective, New Forms, Respire, Homewrecker, No Man, and so many more. One-day passes are $50, but you can get all 3 days for $120. Go to undergroundarts.org and look for Breadbox Booking Presents Dilly Dally Fest 2 to buy tickets.
Hello and welcome to Everything Remade, a podcast that I hope is about growth as much as it is about music. I'm Edie Quinn, and we have a great show lined up for you today. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you about our Patreon page at patreon.com/humanmachine. You can go there to sign up to read zines, get music sneak peeks, and all kinds of other fun stuff. That's patreon.com/humanmachine. Now, I recorded this conversation a couple weeks ago before I got sick, and listening back to it, it was still just so much fun. I hope you enjoy it as well, and now I'd like to play something for you.
And is it ever morning when you're never sleeping? When you're not sleeping. Is it ever morning?
You're hearing Not So In Tune With Shells by Hassan Sabbah, featuring my new pal Tommy Davis on guitar. When this next part kicks in, this is pretty much everything I want in a Screamo riff.
When I was maybe 11 or 12, I was really into metal, and I was into a lot of hair metal, but getting into a lot of thrash, mainly from watching Headbangers Ball.
Yes.
And my cousin at the time, she was dating someone that was into thrash and more aggressive forms of metal, and she was older. And she told me that if I liked something, it was probably Dokken, that I would really like these other bands that he had been exposing her to. And she handed me a tape, and it had Metallica Masters of Puppets and Queensryche Operation Mindcrime. And both of those albums completely blew my mind and shifted my musical journey. And I still adore both of those records. And maybe that actual mixtape that I got, this may not have been the exact first one, but I got a mixtape from my friend Drew, who I did not really know that well at the time. We were communicating through snail mail, like folks used to do back in the day. And he sent me a mixtape of hardcore and punk stuff. And it's notable because the first 10 minutes, he basically just recorded every hardcore band he had when they yelled "go," and made this montage, and it was just a whole stream of people yelling "go," and it was incredible. And I think on that tape was probably stuff like, knowing him at that time, probably SSD, Verbal Assault, a lot of just straight hardcore like that.
Uh-huh. That's awesome. That's like, that's got to predate YouTube videos that are like that exact same thing by like 20 years, Like,
we were thinking 93, 94?
Yeah. There's got to be a YouTube out there right now where you can just like every time a hardcore vocalist yells "go," and it's just like a 20-minute video, you know. But
Yeah, but you think about all the labor that goes into doing that manually with the cassette
oh my
and all the
gosh,
7 inches and LPs where you're flipping back and forth. I mean, it had to have taken hours. It was a labor of love, which is maybe why we're still super close friends to this day.
that's amazing. Yeah, it's wild. Like there was, you know, me making mixtapes personally. When we're talking about labor of love, it's like there's always that, like, okay, I'd be making, and maybe other people didn't do this, but like I'd be making a tape, and you get to that last song and then it clicks like 30 seconds before the song ends and you're like, shit. So I personally
Yes.
would be like, I need a song that's like 30 seconds shorter because I didn't want to leave like the last song like getting cut off. So I'd be like, oh, I need a song that's like 30 seconds shorter or however many seconds shorter. And you know, I'd go and I'd like try to find, you know, but then I did have mixtapes from different people where I would get the tape and that last song would get cut off and they would literally just like put the rest of the song on the other side. Like I remember one tape in particular where that happened was like a mineral song at the end and then like the rest of the song was just on the other side and I was like, that is so weird. But like, yeah, I mean, but if you had one of those players that just like would play the other side as soon as, you know, then it wasn't that big a deal. It was like a long skip in the song or something, you know, but yeah. But if you had to stop and flip it over, you're just like, that's fucking weird. But yeah.
It does. It makes you think though about the the kind of artistry and creativity that had to go into those analog documents, you know, where you are measuring. I remember doing this, measuring out the amount of time that you had on the tape and how much music you could fit on there, especially if you're making it for someone that you care about in whatever capacity. Because the mixtape was a way to say things that maybe you didn't know how else to say, right? And I remember very carefully measuring all of that stuff out. I remember people getting really creative with splicing other things in between songs. So there would be like 10 seconds of jazz interludes. It would pivot to another song or something really funny, just a sample from an 80s movie.
Yeah.
And the amount of labor that went into making the packaging we would send to each other, you know, the handmade cassette covers, and I guess they call them J-cards now. The layouts and things that you would do was, I mean, it had all the creativity and maybe slight pretentiousness of zines, you know? And I love doing that, and I absolutely love getting those in the mail, you know, from people that I knew. And then way back in the day, I had a lot of pen pals from Maximum Rock and Roll and other zines, and that was how we knew each other, right? Was trading tapes like that.
Yeah, I mean, you really like, you know, I mean, sometimes you would get one where it was just like the Maxell like generic thing that came in it and like with the titles written on it and somebody would doodle on it, but like usually it was like straight up, it was like some construction paper or something, and it was drawings on it, and you know, maybe like the best lyric from the best song was written in the middle, you know, or something. And
Hell yeah.
Yeah. And it was really something. It was fun. But you know, so I had listened to Hassan Sabbah, like, you know, from back in the day, from when I knew like all the Usurp kids and stuff, back when Usurp like just started and stuff. And, you know, but it wasn't until yesterday when I was like, okay, so I'm going to have a chat. Who am I going to be chatting with? And you say, oh, it's Tommy. And so I went and I did a little researching. And before I get into that, I want to set a scene here because I was in a band. It was like 1999, you know, and it was just, you know, the band I was in, we were playing for a long time. We were kind of like a Lifetime-ish, you know, like pop punk-ish hardcore, you know, like Lifetime, not pop punk like a lot of people would think, but at the time you might have just called it that, right?
Yeah.
But and we didn't have like we had like sort of some members that lived in other states, etc. And so we were always kind of like had a little bit of a like rotating revolving door with people, like whether they'd play with us or not. Anyway, we get this bass player and we hit it off the bat like right away because he knows like every obscure band, you know, like we'd call screamo these days.
Yeah.
He knows like every obscure band like that. And he's not very good at bass, but he picks up real fast and he's like super like into music, like just as into music as you could be. And that was like the most important thing to me. Anyway, one night he's like, you got to come over to my apartment, like his apartment on campus. He was going to college. He's like, you got to come over to my apartment and we'll hang out and we'll just like go through my records. And I'm like, okay. So
Whoa.
I go over to his apartment and he's like, he has every record that I've ever wanted to have, like, you know, and it's incredible, right? But he pulls out this 1 7-inch. And he's like, I don't know anything about this. I don't remember where I got it. I don't know anything. But check out this 4th track on here. And he plays this 7-inch by this band called Rinse. Oh, and this 4th track on there with the fucking pinch harmonics. Like, I shit myself. I was like, this is the greatest fucking song I've ever heard in my life. Right? And I'm chatting with you yesterday. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to chat about Hassan and Sabbah, you know, and your discography that's just coming out. And then you're like, it's not me. And I go down this rabbit hole and I was like, this is like, I just unlocked like, you know, a vault of ancient knowledge or something, because no one I've ever shown that song to or anything, like there's a YouTube video you can find that has the 7-inch on it. No one I've ever shown that song to or anything has ever known what it was, where this band came from, and now I'm chatting with you. That's fucking so cool. Like,
that
and
is
that's
fucking
wild.
Weird. But let me say this: I don't know what the fucking 4th track is. Do you know the name of it?
I don't know the name of any of the songs because the YouTube video that I found, like, I actually like I could. So here's another thing. Last year, I do this cover compilation every Halloween, and I get like different friends to do collaborations with me, or I just like get my friends' bands to do cover songs. And last year, my friend Pat Snell and I were gonna cover that song. So Pat actually did way more digging than I ever did, and found the lyrics to it and everything. So there must have been like, you know, Pat must know the name of the song and stuff. But it's like,
I have the 7-inch upstairs. I truly cannot remember how many songs are on that 7-inch.
I feel like that's the last song, but I might not be right.
Does it have this woman sort of singing near the end of it, sort of haunting clean vocals?
I'm not sure. I just listened to it earlier today because I was like wanting to refresh my memory, and like I said, I was just listening to it from the YouTube video, and it gets to like that part, and it's like, you know, dana 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 do 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 do. It's like this pinch harmonic there, and I'm like,
okay, I know what you're talking
I'm
about.
like, this is the fucking shit. This is the shit, and my wife is just looking at me like, that's cool, you know. But I'm like.
I think that song is called "Letters Never Sent."
Okay, that makes sense. That seems like something that is sort of like, I'm like, yeah, that's it. But like I said, I'm just like, when I proposed to do this song last year to Pat, it's like I had to put in, like, I felt like another thing where I'm like in the movie Hackers or something. I'm like, because there's like, you just put in Rinse into YouTube, you know, you put in the right combination of words, and then you get the video that actually comes up. And I had to like go to where the song starts, and I'm like, okay, so from 801 to whatever, that's this song. And Pat did the rest of it, and Pat was like, but we didn't end up doing the song because I think just like, you know, this is one of those things sometimes where it's just like, you like, it's hard to keep track of like time and deadlines, you know, especially like when you have kids and stuff. And I think like it was one of those things where like probably I thought that, you know, oh, this like I'll get the drums to it, and then I'll just knock the guitars out real fast, and then like the deadline was like super soon, and I was like, where are the drums? And it wasn't happening at that point. But Pat, if you're listening, like we should do that next year. It's too late this year to do it, but we should do it next year. It'd be sick. But yeah,
That's wild.
Yeah, so wild. And like, then of course, like I'm going through like, Prevail and stuff. And that's one of those ones, like I never listened to Prevail because I just because I'm just like, I get this thing sometimes where I just like assume that I know what a band's going to sound like. And I thought Prevail, I was like, oh, this is probably like a Judge type, band. I couldn't be further.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
No, that's fair enough.
But I like couldn't have been further from the truth. I'm like, here I could have been listening to something that is like in a lot like that Wrench 7-inch that I was like so fond of, but in like an LP form. I could have been listening to this whole time. And so cool to just like find out, about that and just like be like, whoa. But
Oh man, I'm glad you went down the rabbit hole a little bit. It's funny because the Prevail LP was written after the Rent 7-inch. So Prevail broke up, then Rent started, then Rent broke up, and Prevail got back together. But when Prevail first started, we were like a kind of chugga hardcore band, like in the early days. But when we got back together, we're playing the material that you heard on the LP. We actually did cover Judge No Apologies because we're huge Judge fans, you know. But we probably sounded a lot less like Judge by the time we started covering their songs.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, I have no problem with like Judge or Bold or whatever, but like there's just like a lot of bands that were sort of trying to do that just weren't it for me,
No, I totally get it. If someone told me that their band was called Prevail, I would not listen to it. You know what I mean? I mean, we were sort of poorly named for what we became.
Right. So you're talking about like the Faded Words cassette or whatever. That was like a totally different thing than the New Foundations.
Yeah, Faded Words was more akin to like old Chokehold.
Okay.
Like the Prison of Hope LP. I was listening to a lot of that. I was listening to Green Rage. A lot of that like early 90s chugga hardcore. And that was sort of like right at the point I really shifted and was starting to listen to a lot more music like Mohinder and Heroin, and things like that. But it took a while for it to kind of arrive in the sort of songs that we were writing.
Yeah, because I couldn't find that on YouTube. Maybe some other people would have better luck, or they know a channel that they can go through and it's there, but I couldn't find that. And part of the problem with Prevail is like I just put in Prevail New Foundations, found that easy enough, but I put in the other thing and a bunch of other weird stuff came up because there's a band, I guess there's a band that's like some big, like, I don't know if they're like metalcore or whatever. That's the vibe I get. I
think it's a metalcore band.
I Prevail or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I can send you the link. Our drummer put all of our stuff up on Bandcamp
really?
long. So I can find the link and send it to you. But everything is, for better or worse, everything is
warts and all, as they say.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I didn't search Bandcamp for some reason. I should have done that first. But I always like YouTube is kind of like my go-to for something that might be more obscure.
It's the '90s gold mine.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I mean, especially like the channel like Sweet Baby Jesus or how like that. That channel is just like
a national treasure, man.
Yeah. But yeah, you mentioned like a Prevail, and then like Prevail existed, then Rinse existed, and so that explains how it's like it says Prevail 1994 to 1998, and then Rinse 1996. So like that explains that. But like was Prevail more or less your first band, or was there something else that predated that where you were sort of cutting your teeth like with friends and stuff?
Yeah, there were earlier bands. There was a band I was in senior year of high school called Strong Arm, and we sounded exactly as dumb as that name. But it was our effort to be a kind of mid-paced hardcore band, and none of us could play that well. But we were learning how to play and how to play in a band, so it was helpful in that regard. And we played a high school talent show and got thrown off the stage for singing about Satan and drugs, which was funny because we were a straight edge band. And then I was in a band after that with an even worse name, Two Steps Behind. And I was really into that first Split Lip LP, For the Love of the Wounded, when that band was around. I could not play guitar well enough to play those kind of songs, but I was trying. We were not good. We opened for Shelter only because I put the show on. So I got to embarrass myself in front of Ray Capo, which is cool. But I think from that, I met a bunch of people that would later be in Prevail, right? So we kind of got to know each other at that moment, and then Prevail got together, and we were all kind of still learning how to play and write songs a little bit. So I think, there's a pretty dramatic shift between the early Prevail 7-inch, and I think even that Rent 7-inch, and then where the Prevail LP is, you can hear growth musically. We had learned to play with each other because we had been playing with each other for a couple of years. A lot of the music that we were into, we were finally capable of playing that kind of music in a way that I don't think we were able to when we started. But Prevail was the first real serious band where we were going to try to tour. We wanted to put out records. We had all the aspirations of any DIY hardcore band in the 90s.
Thinking about this, like with a perspective of the timeline now, it's kind of like, yeah, I can see how like the Rinse 7-inch might have been like, that's where you're like, well, so we're calling ourselves this other thing now. We have opportunity to sound this way that we want to. And then kind of when you decide to go back to Prevail, it's like, well, we just got good at playing like this style, sort of. Like why?
We figured it out a little bit.
Yeah, and the Prevail, the New Foundations LP is a really just like, if you continue that thread from Rinse, it's like just a tightened up version of what that band could have been. But yeah, how did how did that sort of wind down, and then like you end up forming or whatever, like becoming Hassan Sabbah?
It's funny. I was thinking about this the other day because I don't really remember how Prevail decided not to play anymore. I vaguely remember we had a last show, but I don't know that we really called it our last show. I can't really remember, but we knew everybody was moving on. I was out of college and I was moving to Boston for graduate school. One of our singers was moving to California, and he eventually became an incredible skating photographer and was editor of Thrasher and Trans World and has his own thing now. So everybody was moving on to different places. So the band just kind of dissolved out of time, And I moved to Boston, and, I spent all my time from '94, right when I graduated high school, through all of college, so like '99, playing in bands, primarily Prevail and Rents. And it was a lot of practice. Every week we were practicing. Every time we had a break from school, we went on tour. Even if it was just, a 4-day jaunt down to Florida, we'd go play with Reversal of Man or other friends. And I loved all of that, but it got to be really exhausting. And I was a little tired of scene politics. I was tired, frankly, of the music that I was writing and playing. I think Prevail kind of hit our limit in what we could do and what I wanted to play. So I got to Boston and I had decided, whatever happens, I'm not playing in any bands. And within about 5 weeks, if even that, I was at a party at Sarah Heritage's house in Alston, and she knew everybody. We had been friends from North Carolina, but she lived in Boston. We called her the glue because she connected all of our different friend groups. And I was just sitting there, and she walked over, I think, with Ryan Daniels, who became our bass player. And she said, "Hey, Ryan, this is Tommy. Tommy, this is Ryan. You guys both like Mohinder and heroin. You should hang out." And we sat down and just started talking, and Ryan knew Prevail. And I had heard of his band Fall of Leningrad before. And yeah, we started talking, and it was really within weeks. We were in Mike, our drummer, we were in his basement in Lynn, Massachusetts, trying to figure out if we could do a band. And I still was not sold on actually wanting to play in a band. But then I saw Mike play drums, and I thought that it was something I had to do and see what would happen. So Ryan, somehow, we didn't even have vocals at this point. It was just the three of us. And Ryan sent practice tapes of us to people he knew that did shows around Massachusetts. He sent one to some record label, and everybody was interested in booking us or getting songs from us for a comp. So we had to kind of ramp up and get serious. We got our first singer, Tom, and Zach joined the band not long after that. So we became a 5-piece, and we started playing a lot of shows. I don't know how we were playing shows in those early days because we didn't have that many songs. Our songs were never very long. I don't know that we ever had lyrics in those early days either, but we were fortunate enough to get invited to play tons of shows, or what seemed like tons of shows around New England. And as we started playing and saw kind of what we had, I think we were all musically excited about the way our styles fit together, how we challenged each other a little bit. It was just for me especially, it was a very different process of writing songs and just being involved with music than I had ever had. So the thing with our first singer didn't work out for a variety of reasons, and I knew Chad from back in the 90s. He and I were friends from Prevail and Puritan. Chad and I used to hang out all the time. We took a road trip to Maine, and I reached out to him and told him I was in this other band. He might be into it. We'd love for him to sing. And it just turned out he was moving back east from New Mexico at about the time I wrote him. And when I wrote him, I remember I said, "Hey man, here's a tape of what we're up to." And I don't know, it sounds a little bit like Mohinder, maybe a crazier Groundwork. And he wrote me back and he said, "I definitely want to do this. It doesn't sound like Mohinder. It sounds like Napalm fucking Death." And then we eventually consolidated as that 5-piece for the rest of our existence. And the writing process shifted a little bit more because Chad lived in Pennsylvania. Zach was always in Cape Cod. So it was difficult to make the band work. And we were not together for very long at all. Those distances may be part of why we imploded. But that's sort of the early evolution of the band and how we kind of all ended up in the same place.
Yeah. You said that you weren't used to that
style of writing songs. Were you like in Prevail or whatever? Was it sort of a situation where you would more or less bring in like the 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 whole gist of a song, and everybody would just sort of form around that? And this was way more like show somebody one thing and then everybody takes it from there, or what did you mean by that?
Yeah, the Prevail process predominantly was me writing almost all the riffs and having it mostly arranged, and then I would come to practice and we would all contribute and work through it. We did have some songs that our bass player Chris wrote, our other guitar player Sean had some things, but it was mostly, one person comes in with a whole bunch of riffs, if not a complete song, and then we work through it from there with minor adjustments. With Hassan, the process was so different because we all had very different strengths in the way that we played music and thought about music. So I was coming out of that process where I just write a bunch of stuff, put it together, and then we go. And Ryan was so good at arranging parts of songs and thinking about time signatures and unconventional ways to break up song structures. And he was so smart at that, and I'd never encountered anything like that and never thought about it in that way. So I've just very quickly let go of the idea that I had to come up with a whole song or even come up with a bunch of riffs. And when Zach joined us, Zach is an incredible musician, but he could write incredible guitar parts. He also had a very keen sense of how different parts work together and how we could layer things on guitar. I mean, he had a preternatural ability where I would write something and then he would play this other part over it that was perfect, and it would sound as if we had labored over it for days, and it was just how he understood the thing to work. And then we had Mike's drumming, and Mike never played anything under a riff that I wrote that I imagined how it would sound. So I also kind of let go of that too, which was liberating in a way, because you come up with something, or I would come up with something, or Ryan and Zach and I would come to practice with some things we had been working on with no concept of what the drums should sound like. And what Mike did was always something radically different than whatever might have been in the back of my head. And of course, Chad is an amazing lyricist. He's really good with vocals and kind of emphasizing the emotional parts of songs. And again, when he would lay down vocals, it never hit the way that I had imagined when I was writing it. Because you kind of imagine these things as you write songs, like,
sure,
this is where the vocals will start, and this is where they'll pause, and we're going to have this with the guitars as a transition. And he did not do vocals that way. And it was, it was fine. At that point, we just all understood that it was going to be this chaotic, slightly unorganized writing process, but it was going to come out in a way that was better than we had anticipated. But it took us a while to learn how to do that. And I think we write this in the booklet for the discography, that we had finally learned how to do that when we recorded the 7-inch, which is the last thing we did, and then we broke up. So we were very close to being the band that we were going to be when we stopped.
Yeah. Sometimes that really is the way. I mean, there was a band that I was in at that same time where we had recorded a 7-inch, just like none of us played so the two guitar players played guitar, but the rest of us didn't play these instruments before we got into the band. And in a few months, like, we were like, okay, we're gonna go record a 7-inch, and we did that. And we got another drummer. I was just doing vocals at that point, and I think we got like really good. We had we had like 20. We were playing like 20 song sets, but it was like 18 minutes.
Yeah.
And
it's a lot of ham style.
yeah, and we had a one of the keyboard player's brother had a ADAT recorder, and he
Yeah.
recorded one of our live shows on it. And I remember listening to it and being like, this is what we were always supposed to sound like, you know? And it was like, we didn't even play like 3 more shows after that. And the band just imploded. It was like one of the members of the band was like real antagonistic, and he pissed off the drummer, who was in like 3 bands as it was. So the drummer was just like, well, I'm in 3 other bands. I don't need this shit, you know?
He
And
doesn't need that. Yeah.
yeah. And at that point it was like, cause I mean, I was serviceable at drums. I'm certainly better now than I was then. Like, it'd be hard to not be, but like, I just was like a real, like, put the backbones in and leave it at that. You know, I didn't have flash, you know, at all. And once we had somebody that was capable of delivering that, there was really no going back, you know? But, I don't know. It's sad sometimes when you're like, you know, it's, you know, didn't we almost have it all?
Yeah. I mean, I remember when we recorded the 7-inch with Kurt at God City, it was the first we recorded I Carry Night Under My Arms. That was the last song we recorded. And when we were tracking that song, we did everything live, all the instruments. And then we did another guitar track, and then Chad did the vocals. But when we were doing the initial tracking for that song, I had never heard Ryan's bass lines. And they're so prominent at the end of that song. And that song now is unthinkable to me without the bass line that comes in near the end. And I had never heard it before. And I've thought since then that we learned so much about what we sounded like and how certain parts were complementary, that our songwriting probably would have changed coming out of that had we had a little bit more time to be a band. It would have developed in ways that probably could have been pretty interesting. We had one song that we never recorded. It was one of the last songs that we wrote. And I think someone has told us that they have a video of us playing one of our last shows and we play that song. But I, for the life of me, cannot really remember anything about what it sounds like.
Yeah, that's rough. I've talked about this before, but it's like, I'm sure that's not the case with y'all's song, but like, there was definitely a song that the band I was talking about, Dance and Destroy, that we had. I don't know why I called it this. There were advertisements that were going around, for those cameras. And it was like something about the mind of Minolta. So like I named this song The Demented Mind of Minolta. But anyway,
Yeah.
And I remember that song had this clean guitar part in it. And when I wrote that guitar part in the middle of this like otherwise like really heavy, like metal-y sounding song, when I initially wrote that guitar part, I was like, I felt like more sad than I'd ever felt in my entire life, like playing this part and writing it and being like, I felt like I unlocked something that I was trying to like, I was like, my entire history of playing guitar has led to unlocking this feeling that I just got when I wrote this, right? And that song never got recorded. It only got recorded on this ADAT, which I gave to an engineer because by the time that the ADAT was given back to me, it was snapped. And I gave it to an engineer, like, do you know anyone that can fix this? And then like less than a year later, the engineer wasn't recording people anymore, and I'm friends with him on Facebook now, but I'm like, hey, remember that ADAT from 20 years ago? Like, that's not going to happen. You know what I mean? But yeah, it's and there's a weird part of me that like I feel like I hear other songs that I've written with this sort of this line in them And I'm like, I'm still chasing that. I'm still trying to figure out what that part was and like recreate it. And I'm like, I can't. Like there's no, and maybe I have. That's the other thing, right? Because you're remembering it with this certain fondness, and like it's that first instance of feeling that is so powerful. Even if I was playing, even if I like had played the exact same thing and it's 20 years later, I wouldn't even know it because it wouldn't feel the same.
Yeah, no, that's for sure.
And I mean, I'm sorry to get like real pretentious. You're like, I just met you.
No,
What are we
no,
doing?
I mean, lost rip, the real part of it, you know?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's something. And I mean, that's what we're doing anyway, right? We're trying to dig down in there, and we're trying to find these things about ourselves that we can share with each other, and, you know, and other people can relate to these things, whether it's just something they hear and they get something in that tingle in their own brain or whatever it is, you know, but
Yeah, that's the hope, man. You know, you never know. I mean, since the Hassan discography came out, I've had people write us, you know, people that weren't even born when that 7-inch came out, and they're telling how much that record meant to them and how it influenced whatever bands that they're in. And we were around for, I don't know, 10 months. And it never occurred to me, it probably never occurred to anyone in the band, that we would have this kind of afterlife, or that anyone would care enough for us to ever put out a discography, or that any label would recoup the cost of doing it. But you never, I don't know, maybe it's especially with this kind of underground DIY punk and hardcore stuff, you never really can anticipate how it's going to connect and what the residual life of it might be.
it's a testament to the kind of music that we play, that like it can be small, right? Like they're only going to make 500 of these records or whatever, you know. I don't know how many like of your discography. I'm just putting that number out there.
Yeah.
But they're only going to make 500 of these records, and like, and for the life of the band, for example, like this band might not even be able to sell these records, right? You don't know, right? But like somewhere down the line, like this music is powerful enough that like these songs will, like, as long as there's a YouTube, or as long as there's, you know, blogs online or whatever, these songs will outlive the bands, and eventually even outlive us. And that's I think that's, even if in the very smallest way, that's incredible. I don't, you know, there's a prevailing theory, you know, that like, you know, every person, there's going to be a point where someone says your name for the last time. But like when you make music,
Yeah.
it's not that far-fetched to think that just might never happen. And that's wild.
Yeah, it is. It's a bit of a mind fuck. And
Yeah.
it's strange. I don't, it shouldn't be strange, because I still listen to things, you know, that transformed things for me 30 years ago. So it shouldn't be surprising that you can write music that has these kind of afterlives that you can't anticipate or foresee. But it is surprising to me, you know. That band One Way Mirror posted a video a while ago, maybe about a year ago at this point, of them covering one of our songs.
Yeah, I was gonna say, there's definitely like that, like, specifically what y'all sounded like, and like Prevail and stuff like that, sort of heavily metallic, like, tinged like hardcore is making a strong resurgence right now. And that was the band that first came to mind when I was listening to Prevail. Is I was like, this is, they like this. And that's really cool, because like,
That is cool. I
yeah.
mean, I mean, when Hassan was together, when we first started, I was, I mean, it's a weird thing to say, in hindsight, we were part of, in our scene, at least, is part of that scene with Orchid and Jerome Stream and Red Scare, Seisha, Page 99. We certainly played with, I don't know if we ever played with Red Scare, but we played with all of those bands and we knew those people. And we did splits, with Usurp. So we knew everybody. We were kind of in that world, but it was a weird thing because we were into the kind of earlier wave of that stuff that we knew wasn't the thing anymore. So I still was taking notes when we were writing songs from Portraits of Past or Reach Out or Shotmaker or Heroin. And everybody loved that stuff, you know what I mean? But we were playing shows with these bands now that seem legendary, but at the time they were just kind of like the other bands on the bill.
Yeah.
And we were listening to that still, the mid 90s, late 90s stuff, and getting into other kinds of music that had nothing really to do with punk or hardcore. And I remember feeling when we were playing shows that I felt like maybe I shouldn't have been playing shows anymore because I didn't care about, quote unquote, the scene in the way that I did even like 1 or 2 years prior to playing in Hassan. And it wasn't, I don't say this because I think any of those bands were lesser than the bands that were on Gravity or whatever. I don't mean it that way, but it was just a kind of, you're at different points in your life, and I was at that point where I had been into a certain kind of music for 6 or 7 years and was kind of getting, for a lot of reasons, getting tired of that scene or feeling kind of betrayed by it in certain ways or whatever. And it never entered my mind that anything that in that moment would have endured. So I think in my head, I thought this kind of sound hit its peak with that Portraits of Past LP. And I still think that's the case. I still think that's like the best thing that quote unquote Screamo will ever produce.
Yeah.
But that's fine.
There was definitely a conversation that I had with one of my friends where like, we were basically like, what do you think the quintessential like LP is of this sound? And that's the one for sure.
It is unquestionably that.
Yeah.
You can make an argument for the Heroin LP and other things as being, quintessential. But as far as the most original songwriting, I think the most powerful songs, certainly the best guitars in that whole genre, it's that fucking LP, man. Nothing has touched that since it came out. And I mean, part of the reason I wanted to do Hassan, once we got into it and decided we were going to be a band and do all the things bands are supposed to do, I wanted to try to rip off Portraits of Past because I love that LP so much. I still love that LP. I listen to it all the time. And no one has surpassed that, and I remember, and again, I'm going to sound like an asshole saying this. I don't mean it this way. This is more a reflection of how I felt and who I was at the time. But I remember going to all these shows, and I would say with the exception of Neil Perry, who I fucking loved, but everybody else that we played with, and again, this is not throwing shade on any of these bands. I don't mean it this way. But I just felt like everything that I had loved before was so far superior to anything that was currently happening in the scene. And I mean that about Hassan too. That I just felt like, the scene is it's winding its way down, and we're kind of the last gasp of this thing.
What did you think was
like,
but I had no idea that we were like on the cusp of a whole new wave of bands. You know, it did not
Yeah.
feel that way to me. And part of that is because I was in my early 20s, and I was probably an asshole, and we were all drinking too much and being self-destructive. So I mean, part of it was that. But I really did feel that everything was kind of winding its way down, and something else was going to come along. Of course, that's not what happened.
yeah. What did you think was like? What was the? Were you seeing like or were you feeling like there was a tonal shift in the sort of influences of the newer bands at that time that wasn't interesting to you? Like, were you like, oh, everybody is bringing in like these like melodic influences, or like what was it, or was it just like, hey, we're rehashing this stuff but not as good? Like, what was the?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I want to answer this honestly about the way that I remember feeling, and not sound like an asshole, because I'm not trying to like diminish anything any of those bands did. And some of those bands I ended up liking a hell of a lot more later,
Sure.
when I was older. So it's nothing against those bands or the quality of their records or anything like that. It really is about, I think, my time in the scene and how long I was there and where I was personally and emotionally or whatever. But I think one thing that I remember seeing Orchid for the first time, and I thought they were amazing. Like, they were just incredible live. The energy in that room was explosive. And every time we played with them, I loved watching them live. But I remember listening to the LP, the Chaos Is Me LP, which I still like a whole lot. You know, I listen to that record every now and then. And I remember listening to it and thinking, like, they took what was so good and weird about One-Eyed God Prophecy and Union of Uranus when that stuff was dropping, and they compressed it and made it, like, way catchier, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that, I mean, to them, that's a testament to be able to do that. But I also felt like at that moment in my own sort of musical, whatever, evolution is probably too grandiose of a word, but just where I was musically, when I was the stuff I was listening to and trying to explore, you know, I just felt like this is a really good version and development of a sound that really was, for me, was transformative at a certain moment, but I had already been through that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I totally understand if someone went to an Orchid show when they were 18 or 19 or whatever, just like when I went to see One-Eyed God Prophecy when I was young, like how that could completely melt their brain and why they would totally adore it. And in some ways, like, I wish that had been my experience a little bit. But I don't know. I mean, some of it is just, I was bitter about certain things in hardcore because I was getting older and I'd been in it for a while. Some of the music wasn't hitting me the way that some of the earlier bands did. And I think some of that is because I was older and at a different place in my life. I think I was upset about that too, because a lot of that music meant so much to me. And I was feeling as though it wasn't hitting me in that way. And again, that's not a fault of the records. It's not a fault of the bands or anything like that. It really was just a kind of me feeling certain ways about punk and music and the politics and style of the scene at a particular moment in time.
Yeah.
And we were all kind of exploring different genres for the first time. I was getting really into things like Codeine and Songs Ohio and quote-unquote slowcore, weird stuff, older punk like the Screamers. You know, like I was beginning to branch out of that kind of screamy punk hardcore world. So I think it was just a combination of things. I don't think it necessarily was that the quality or inventiveness of the scene was less than it was before. You know, it's not like a kind of old man back in my day thing. It really was about me and where I was at that particular moment in time. And I think also, like, I missed a lot, because I felt that way. There were bands that we played with that I will see on flyers now I'm like, how the fuck did I miss watching that band? Like, I'm an idiot. Why was I in the room? Like, we played with Volume 11. Are you serious? I missed that? Like, what the hell is wrong with me? But, it's in the discography booklets. I'm not saying anything out of turn, but, we were all emotionally and mentally not in a good place. And I think that kind of colored the way I thought about the scene and our role in it at that time too.
Yeah. When Hassan ended it, did you more or less stop playing?
Yeah, I mean it was really acrimonious when we ended. We're all close again, so I feel okay kind of telling the story, But we were set to go on tour. And we were going to go on tour with this band from Virginia called Violence Takes Refuge in Virtue. And it was a band of this guy, Matt Strugar, that I knew really well and had hung out with in Eastern Europe and done all kind of crazy punk stuff with. And he, if I remember correctly, he told us about the kind of van that they had. And we had all these people that were going to be able to go with us on the tour. But then he called when they were en route, and I think they were in Providence, so, an hour and a half from Boston or whatever. And he said, hey, we're coming, we're going to be there. The bad news is that we didn't get the van we thought. We got the smaller van, so, roadies and stuff aren't going to be able to go. And we called Chad, and we told him, that none of the roadies can go, none of our friends can go, which meant that his partner at the time wasn't going to be able to go. And he lived out in the woods in Pennsylvania. So, if he's gone and she's just there, she's there by herself with the fucking owls and whatever else is roaming around in the woods there. And he was like, I don't think I can go if she can't come, which in hindsight is a totally reasonable thing to say.
Yeah.
But it just became clear that we weren't going to go on tour. And 90 minutes before we were set to leave and go on tour. And we were not in a good place with each other, and there was a conversation about going on tour without him. If I remember correctly, I refused to do that. So I did not go on that tour. I got in my car. I think I drove down to South Carolina, where I'm from, and stayed at home for a little while. And I was really upset and frustrated and angry about the whole thing. I lived with Ryan. So Ryan, I stayed in touch. We stayed friends. But yeah, I mean, it was bad, man. And we didn't talk for a long time. And there was a lot of stuff floating around the internet where certain people from the band were rightly upset years later and would talk shit about Hassan in comment sections of YouTube or whatever. But that kind of, with time and hindsight, those old wounds kind of heal themselves a bit. And, we all love each other, and we talked on and off about this discography. And when it became clear that we actually had the material and we could do it, we kind of all got back in touch and talked about how we would do it. And we were able to revisit the history of the band a little bit, speak a little bit more honestly about how much we all valued each other and valued what we did in the band. But it was not a good end, man. It was not a good ending at all.
Yeah. As was the way at the time with a lot of bands. It was,
I was talking with Ryan about this. There was, I had decided after that, I'm no more bands. I was going to be done with everything. But there was a hot second where me, Ryan, and Ben Collar from Converge, we got together, and it might have been Converge's practice space, and we jammed a little bit and played, and we're thinking about doing a project of some sort together. But I think we wrote part of a song, and I was trying to go for some kind of shot maker unwound thing, but then it just never really evolved after that. I think partially we were just burned out on all the emotional toll of being in a band and what had happened with Hassan. But there's an alternate universe, where that band worked out. I would be really curious to know what it sounded like.
Yeah, for sure. That's I mean, you didn't like you didn't take a downgrade in collaborators one bit for sure. you know, uh,
I know.
it's like a lot of times it's like, you have this rough ending to a band, and the next time you play, you're like, you're playing with people that are, maybe you're sort of thinking like, oh, but the last drummer really would have ate this song up. This would have been so. But you're like, but this works. Yeah, this works. And
Yeah, with Ben it was different, right?
yeah,
But
right. You're just like,
I mean,
oh,
I'm sure that was part of it too, because once I started playing with Mike, I just knew I was never going to play with another drummer like that, and I would never be able to write songs like that. And Chad was always one of my favorite vocalists. I mean, he was a really close friend, but I always loved his vocals, and it was just a kind of dumb accident that we ended up in this band, and it ended up being kind of everything that I would have wanted to do in that style of music, but in ways, a process that I never could have anticipated or predicted. And it would be hard to recreate something like that, and I don't think I even knew what kind of music I would want to do after that.
you talk about like you're sending someone a tape, and they're like, yeah, I'm just gonna move and do this thing, and like now we don't have to do anything like that, right? Like the drummer in my band lives in Washington and I live in Indiana. Like we don't
Yeah.
have to do that anymore. But like back in the day, you used to just make really bad like life decisions just over a band or whatever,
Yeah.
and just see how it happened. See how it worked out. And like, yeah, we all got like cool stories because of it. But like, yeah, it's that's got to be part as well, of the sort of like unexamined reason why, like the way these things exploded the way they did when they did, right? Because it's like you may not even ever have said this, right? But it's like I moved across the country to do this, and now it's ruined, and and like that part might never come out, but it's like that's why the explosions that happened the way they did, in a way that like when a band breaks up now, it's like generally speaking, it can be for the most part pretty amicable. It's like, well, this person's not playing in the band anymore, and we wish them luck. And it's just like,
Yeah.
because we're not taking the kinds of risks necessarily. We don't have to, right? But yeah, it's I don't know, different place, different time.
It is, and I think I've thought about this when we were putting together the materials for the discography, and I was writing some of the liner notes. I was thinking about how the only way for a band to be a band at that point in time was for everybody to be in the same geographical vicinity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Chad moved to Pennsylvania, and we were in Massachusetts. And Zach was in Cape Cod, but he would come to Boston every weekend. So that wasn't that big of an issue. But I think there was something about the fact that we were split apart, and we were pressing, trying to make this band work, that increased the kind of tension within the band and the urgency that I think had something to do with the creative process, as well as the kind of social dynamics that eventually undid the band. So I think, it's kind of unthinkable that Hassan could have happened without all these problems that undid the band. I think that's actually what made the music and the songwriting and everything else unfold the way it did. And we learned this when we were putting the discography together. We never practiced in the same room. Like, we never once practiced with all 5 members, ever. And it's unthinkable that happened. Like every show that we played was kind of like a practice. That was the only time we got to play together. But I think there's something about the kind of chaotic nature of that arrangement of the band that underwrites some of the barely structured chaos of the actual music. If we had had the ability to send files back and forth and kind of write at our leisure, I think it would have been a very, very different band.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, just do you think just in a more, it just would have been refined a bit more?
It probably would have been refined, and it probably, I don't know, it probably would have sucked. To be honest, I mean, I think there's something to, when you're writing some songs and then you have to go play them 3 weeks after you've put them together, you don't want to embarrass yourself.
Yeah.
I think there is something about that kind of process that, as you're saying, is probably mostly lost in the digital era, just simply out of necessity. You had to do it that way back then. So yeah, I don't think Hassan would have existed outside of the particular conditions in which it existed. I think the music probably would have been very different if we could have been more patient and deliberate. And yeah, I think it probably would have been terrible. I don't know. We probably would have dragged songs out more. I don't know. I mean, to me, listening to the songs and we were putting the LP together, it just felt to me like we had to have known this thing was not going to work long term. Yeah. And the kind of chaos of it feels that way a little bit when I went back to it.
So when you listen, are you like, this part should have went 2 more times? Like this should have done this? Is that the kind of like revisionish?
No, I mean, actually in a weird way, because I don't feel this way about most of the music that I've ever written. I kind of feel like everything is exactly where it should be. Like everything is in its place. And it, again, like some of those things when we recorded with Kurt, I had never heard certain guitar parts or bass parts just because of, we're practicing in a basement, you can't hear shit. And we didn't demo a lot of those songs, that we had recorded for the first time. But I feel like everything is kind of where it should be, and reflects a lot of what we were feeling as we were writing those songs, for better or worse. I don't know. I mean, I used to think that I Carry Night Under My Arms, like at 5 minutes, was way too long of a song for that genre. But, in hindsight, I think like, yeah, everything is kind of in its place and it's where it should be. And the only thing that we took out is in the original recording of I Carry Night, Chad had this clean vocal part, but we cut it right after we recorded. And that's the only thing I remember us doing where I thought like, yeah, that doesn't belong. That doesn't fit. And we kind of all agreed, right? We cut it out. But yeah, I think everything is kind of where it should be. And this like weird thing that we put together kind of magically manifested itself. And probably anything that's good about it is like exceeds whatever we had planned for it to do.
That's wild. Yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things, like for me personally, I don't think, oh, I should have done this like longer or whatever. I do have instances where I will force something on a song because I feel like I've like played my hand too much in a particular way or whatever. So I'll force something, like I'll be like, oh, well, when this happens, I feel like people are going to kind of expect this to be this big payoff or whatever. So I'm going to keep this part nice and short to sort of play against that expectation. And so sometimes I'll think, but what if that was, what if I didn't make that decision? But what usually happens to me though is, it's not that, I think, that needs to, when I listen to something, I think, that needs to be shorter or whatever. But sometimes what does happen is like, we will end up getting ready to
play a show and we'll be playing one of those songs. And the drummer will not have been in the band when this song was written or whatever. So he learns the song like as it is. And when I'm practicing it for the show, I'm not even necessarily always playing along with the recording. And then I'm like, oh, I thought that whole end went like 12 times. And he's like, no, it went 16 times. And I'm like, well, let's just pretend it goes 12 because 16 seems like a lot, you know?
Too much. It's funny. I mean, we were talking about that Portraits of Past record and how we both think it's like the gold standard.
Hey, it's the one, yeah.
And I think part of that is because like that band can fucking write a 6-7 minute song and not a single part feels like it's played too long or too short. You know what I mean? Like everything on that record is perfectly placed. And I mean, the flip side of this would be, you know, we were talking about Prevail a little bit before. Prevail put a 7-inch out after the LP. And the first song on that 7-inch, I remember we wrote it and I really liked it a lot. It was just kind of more aggressive, gnarlier hardcore than we had done before. But a lot of the other stuff on that record to me felt like we were just kind of uninspired, I think. And there are parts on there that are fine, but for the most part, I think most of those songs kind of what we did on the LP. And I mean, I think maybe that's a case of a band kind of having outgrown its moment a little bit. So I feel very different about some of those songs than I do about the Hassan stuff. But again, I mean, Hassan was around for 9 months, and the 5 of us that did all the recordings were together for even less. And there's something about that kind of compressed moment in time. 5 people that really loved each other and loved playing those songs and loved writing music together, but also had serious issues with the scene and then had serious emotional and psychological problems at the time. Like, I think all of that was so combustible, but made for the way that those songs happened and how everything kind of fell into place. Maybe I would feel differently if we were together for another year and had written other stuff, you know?
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, things just kind of slotted into place.
Yeah.
With those songs, yeah. It's weird.
So, to sort of start wrapping things up, like, Iodine comes to you and they're like, we want to put the discography out. And so everybody's back in touch for the first time in a while, or maybe that's not correct entirely. But so where does it go from there? It's like, okay, we have to start figuring out who has photos. We have to, remember if we remember all these lyrics and stuff like that. So
yeah,
was there ever any talk in all of this, like where y'all, were reconnecting and stuff about like when this comes out, like we're going to play some shows too, or is that just not an option?
No. So let me answer that in 2 parts. So there's like the first part about like how this thing came together, and then the other part about the possibility of playing again. I would say for the first part, we had conversations with Andy Lowe at RoboDog, Robotic Empire, about trying to do a discography years and years ago. He was interested way, way long ago. But we thought that a lot of the DATs and the other things were lost or we couldn't find them. So for years, we just thought it was physically impossible to put everything together. And when Casey restarted Iodine, some conversations started, and then we talked about what we would do. And Ryan went home and found the reel-to-reel tapes of the 7-inch. And then we managed to get the other material, and we made the decision we would send it to Jack Shirley to do the remastering, and we would see how it sounded, if it was worth putting out. And Iodine was down from the minute that we indicated any interest, and to their credit, they were very patient with us. But we collected. I still had a bunch of flyers and stuff. I don't really throw a lot of that stuff away, So I had a bunch of stuff. Ryan uncovered some things, and people sent us photos that they had taken, some of which we had never seen before. So we found a lot of stuff that we had never encountered, which was very cool. And got some memories from other people. It was kind of a long process of us getting our act together a little bit and going back and forth with Iodine. And again, they were very patient with us, which we're very grateful for. But as we were doing this, we started the Instagram account partially to collect things so we could try to make this happen. And from the jump, we were getting questions about whether or not we would play, and we got asked to play some festivals or other shows, and we kind of batted the idea around a little bit. And there are a couple ways to think about this. One is a very practical way, which is Mike plays drums full time, and he plays drums in Madball and Unearth, and that guy is 9/10 of the year probably is all over the globe playing huge festivals and touring. So he's incredibly busy. We're geographically scattered. It just, the logistics of it would be really hard. And I think before we even would commit to doing it, the five of us would need to get into a room together, hang out, and then play a little bit and see if we thought we could do it, do it physically, but also if it was still there, like I don't want to look like some fucking old ass cover band playing songs from my youth. Like I have no desire to do that.
Yeah.
So logistically it's really hard. And then I don't have like a hard stance on this one way or the other about bands reuniting and playing shows. I mean, people can do whatever the fuck they want, and I don't have a hard stance about us doing it or not doing it. But as I see like all these bands get back together and like they sound great and they're playing to like 20 times more people than any of us ever played to,
Right.
these in early aughts, I kind of thought there's something cool and something that I like about bands that I really liked and had a deep attachment to. And for some of them, I was there at the moment and I got to see them and I got to be part of it as it happened. And I'm so grateful for it. Like I got to see Portraits of Past play a house, and they were incredible. And I'll never forget that. And, they got back together and they did it right. I mean, they put out another record that's still fucking incredible.
Yeah.
Most people can't do that. I would say like actually nobody can do that except Portraits Past. But, also like I adore Evergreen and I never saw Evergreen. And part of me would be upset if they got back together and played shows, there's something about the bands that do something that people like. They are of their moment. They happen when they happen. You're either there or you're not. And the kind of mischance and the ephemerality of it, I find that kind of attractive, and there's something about that I like. And I think I partially like that because in the moment that we are in, everything infinitely and readily available for anybody at any time. And that is not how I got into underground music. And that wasn't part of my discovery process. It was really fucking hard to find bands. It was really fucking hard to find records, bands sometimes. And part of my attachment to those records and those bands was for that. It was difficult and it was rare and it was not understood that you were going to get to see bands that you love most, And when you got them, it was a moment, to be able to see these bands. So there is a part of me that kind of likes the idea of just not ever doing it, but that's not to say that we won't, and again, not to cast any bands that do. Yeah. But I do. We had a brief text conversation about if we did it, we would only play the kind of venues that we played when we were together. So fucking VFW halls, whatever. We're not playing whatever. We wouldn't play anything else. We would just kind of play what we did. I think I thought it was very cool that Orchid kind of hand selected all the bands that they played with when they played those shows, and they got a mix of older bands and newer bands, you know? So if we did it, I would want to play the kind of places we did. I would want to play with bands that we felt like either historically or new bands were kind of in the same world that we are or were in. But I don't know. We'll see. I don't think the door is totally shut on it, but it is difficult. And I think there are different feelings among all five of us about this. But I would be just as happy if Hassan ever played another show as I might be if we played and I got to talk with younger people that really want to see the band. You know what I mean? Like, I think there would be good things to take out of either direction. But the conversation would be very different, I think, if we were all able to be in one place and see what would happen. But that's just been enormously difficult to make happen.
Yeah.
But we've had offers,
Yeah.
and they're very weird. I mean, the guarantees that people offer to play shows now, it's like more than we ever made as a band.
Yeah, we did, not on a whole tour did we ever see this number. Yeah.
Yeah, just like, that's more than gas money, man.
Yeah.
You know? So we'll see. I mean, if it's going to happen, I think it would have to happen soon on the tail of the discography coming out, you know? I mean, otherwise people just aren't going to give a shit in like a year or two.
Yeah, missed that window for sure.
Yeah, totally.
And that was my conversation with Tommy Davis. Thank you so much, Tommy, for taking the time to chat with me. It was a pleasure. Thanks to all of y'all for listening wherever you are. Don't forget to go by patreon.com/humanmachine and check out what's going on, as well as get your tickets for Dilly Dally Fest. Until next time, take care and do good things.